Oh, I'm recording. Good evening, ladies and gents, or woodlanders, or whatever other thing that I'm going to call you guys because of stuff. All right, this is a spur of the moment video. You can see some of my fancy new recording stuff in the background here, but you don't get the benefit of that tonight because it's a spur of the moment thing, and I want to take the time to set it up because ain't nobody got time for that. But what I do have time for is to show you guys how to turn this into this using this. And in case this is backwards, I don't know how it's going to render. This is the new Fibings leather colors. It's water-based, and so it's safe to use in schools and hospitals and prisons and stuff, and it's not flammable, and it doesn't stink, and it's not going to ruin your pancreas, because mine already is, and so I don't use oil-based dyes because they're terrible. So having a hard time looking at what I'm supposed to look at here because I'm using my phone, because I don't have a computer anymore because the repairman lost it, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, no fancy intros. I'm going to edit it as good as I can, but if you're still watching, stay tuned. We're going to dye this stuff up using my best method that I have found to dye this stuff using these leather colors. And then after we're done with that, I'm going to go through and talk about it a little bit, because some people are going to say the water-based dyes aren't as good as the other stuff and blah, 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 and I'm going to show you why I don't believe that at all. So stay tuned, this is what we're doing here. Okay. First things first, we're going to oil this veg tan with our Obenov's leather oil. And we use Obenov's because it's the best, and we don't want to cheat ourselves out of the best product possible. So we're going to use Obenov's leather oil because it's the best. They just sent me a gallon of this stuff today because they love me. And they love me because I love them so much. And so it's a reciprocal relationship, and we all benefit. So here we go. I'm going to take this dauber and oil this stuff up very unceremoniously. Now, you might want to ask, why am I oiling this before I dye it with water-based dye? Doesn't oil keep the water from blah, 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 blah? And the answer to this is very scientific. No, it doesn't. And I don't know why or what the science actually is behind it, but this is the best method that I have found to make it all work the way I want it and need it to work, and to come out very even and very beautiful. And so that's what I'm going to do, because that's what I do. And so I'm going to show you, this is what I do. I'm not going to worry about the end so much there, but I got total coverage. If there's a little extra, I'll just use my hand to spread it around. And then I'll do this piece too, because I'm dyeing both. And now I'm going to let this sit for absolutely no time at all. I'm going to move right to the dye. And so now I'm going to put on my dirty dish gloves. And they're only dirty with dye. I don't recommend actually using your dish gloves. And then I'm going to just tore a little bit, but that's okay, because these were very cheap, and I've used them for probably 3 years now, this one pair, as you can tell from the excessive amount of dye on the gloves. Now this says, this is the same stuff I showed you earlier, I promise, it's just a smaller bottle. But it says dark brown, and then it gives you a little color thing of what dark brown looks like, and I'm not sure what that's all about, but you can achieve that color with this stuff. But I'm going for a very deep, dark, rich brown color. If I can find my sponge, which also has seen years of... Where did my sponge go? Very bottom of the bin. Every unclean thing dwells. Anyway, there we go. This was one of the big, I'm not sure, this is a sponge, I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna shake this up a little bit, and I'm gonna show you how to get some. You can get light brown out of this. Also, make sure that my Dang it. All right, good. You can get light brown out of this also just by being very quick and diligent with it. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna get that on there, and while it's still like that, I'm gonna use this to buff it. And that's a pretty nice. Now obviously I wouldn't leave it like that, but you saw the method. Put it on and buff it off quick. And the grain still pops out, which I really like. That's what I'm going for. I don't want a complete coverage with the dyes that I use because I like the natural look of the leather to shine through, but I'm not going for something light. I'm going for something very dark. And it says to apply a coat and then wait. But if you wanted it a little darker, you put it on there, and while it's still wet, buff it off. And now that's a little bit darker. It's about a medium brown, maybe a little bit lighter. But I'm going for a dark brown. A very, very dark brown. And so I don't wait in between coats or whatever. I've not found that to be a necessary thing. And so now this is not as dark as I'm wanting it to be, but I have kind of run out of what's on my sponge here. And so before I go even darker, I'm gonna flip this over. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's got some dark spots in it, but also you can still see the veg tan natural color coming through. And so that's what I would call like a bison brown, maybe, if you were using EcoFlow. It's about what that looks like. But I'm doing both sides of this, and so one thing I'm gonna do after I get this full coverage here, I'm not necessarily worried about this in the backside being the darkest thing. So I'll take my rag, and you can see that slicking up because that starts the burnishing process. I'm going with the grain, rubbing with the grain to lay it down. I'm gonna take the side of my glove and burnish that while it's still wet. And now that's not all the burnishing I'm gonna do, but that's a good start. And then I'm gonna take my sponge that I haven't redone, and I'm gonna do the sides. And you'll notice that leaves a line on the side. You might want to throw that on there. And then you might want to buff it off if you want to control how dark it's gonna get. And I do. And while that's still wet, I'll use the side of my glove to start that burnishing process again. And that works pretty well, in my opinion. I'm not going to worry about the end here because this is going to get cut off into a different shape. But I'm not sure how long it needs to be until it's actually on the bag, and I'm not going to guess at it or measure it. I'm going to use my eyeballs. So that's where we're at there. Now once my edges are good and I'm satisfied with the color of those aren't really going to lighten up. Especially not after I treat it with the Obenovs. But this isn't quite dark enough yet, so I'm going to do it again. And I want it to be real good and dark, a very deep, dark, rich cocoa brown, so I'm gonna let that start to soak in there. And as it does, I'm just gonna rub it around again. And now I'm gonna put this piece aside and start on this piece. And now, as you can tell, the oil didn't hinder that from soaking in, because there's like penetrators and scientific stuff in the dye itself. And so I'm not wiping this off like I did that one, because that was just to demonstrate how to get a lighter color. But I want this really dark, and I don't want to take time to do it multiple coats and let it dry and do all that. I don't know who has time for that in their leather crafting career. I certainly do not. Now, if you're not experienced with dye and you're not very fast about it, and you don't know what it's going to do, I recommend practicing on some pieces you don't care about, maybe. Just until you know how it's going to act and how fast and how much time you have before you have to take certain actions and all that. It's kind of a art form. If I want to feel overly important, I'll call it that. And this is just a piece of super high-tech fancy paper called cardboard. If you want to be professional and use what the professionals use, I recommend an old cardboard box from something you've gotten in the mail. And then you can just use it over and over and over and over and over again until one day you decide to do something different with it. In which case you can just use another one. And now, while that's still wet and still has dye on the surface, this is a good way to even it out so you don't have spots that are splotchy or dark or looks gross. And so you do a bit of that buffing now to get the excess dye off the surface. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to get it wet one more time. And I'm going to even all that out. With my super dirty, very used rag. And this is just from the bag of rags that you get from like Lowe's or whatever. It's just cut up t-shirts. And they usually smell real pretty. And they're usually pretty clean, so... and there's different sorts of fabric, cotton fabric in there. Some of it's ribbed, some of it's ultra soft, some of it's just regular t-shirt stuff like Hanes. You got your Calvin Klein and your Giorgio Armani t-shirts all wrapped up in the same bag where status doesn't matter any longer. So I use that repeatedly. So now, that was very quick. That's going to retain its color. That's not going to bleed off. It's not going to run. It looks good. It's very dark and rich. This is not done though. After I let this sit to dry, and I usually do that overnight, I'll usually do my dyeing and set it off to do something and then do something else for a while. But after this is done drying, I'm going to do the Obanoff treatment using the heavy duty LP. And I'm not going to do any kind of acrylic sealer on this. When I'm done with it, it's going to feel very much like a oil tanned leather or a Latigo, but not really. It's not going to be all oily and nasty and gross, but it's going to feel different than some of your dry, crunchy, squeaky leathers. It's not going to be dry, crunchy, or squeaky, and it's probably going to last much longer than those dry, cracky squeakies, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. All right, so now it is tomorrow, and by that I mean today, because tomorrow doesn't really exist because time is an illusion. But anyway, the point is the dye is dry, and my leather is not nuked from the dye, because dye has dryers and finishers in it and whatnot, and science stuff, and it murders your leather in my opinion. Not so much if you oil it first. It's not wet with oil, but I can feel that it has been oiled, if that makes any sense. I know I'm talking riddles, but whatever. You're not gonna get anything better than that for me. So now we're going to use the Obanoff LP to finish it. I'm not gonna seal this up with anything, because I wanna be able to protect it with stuff. And so I don't have any real ceremony with applying Obanoff other than wearing the hat. And at this point, this is a sponsored thing, I guess you'd call it. After 8 solid years of riding hard for Obanoffs and buying gallons and gallons and gallons of this stuff, now I don't have to currently, so that's good and fun. I like that. So I'm just going to use the heat and friction from my hands All right, so I just rub it in until it's kind of tacky. That's the wax on the top, the oil is kind of soaked in, and then I do that a couple times until I've got a satisfying saturation. And lighting changed because I just closed my curtain on my window. But we still have this halo of fluorescence, so sorry about that. We're not real professional around here, except for when it comes to leather work. This might seem a little excessive, but each time I'm just putting a little more on, not a lot. I just want to make sure I've got full coverage here. And then it's soaked in nice and in depth. And the edges are done good. And the surface is done good. It's kind of like Mr. Miyagi before he fixes a broken thing. But not really, because it ain't broke. It's a good way to practice your friction fire hand drill. Not really. It's only one good way to practice that. It's with the spindle in your hand and a hearth board under it. All right, so now these have sat for a moment and they're soaked in, they're a little bit tacky, a little bit sticky. At this stage, if you want it to be real shiny, you can buff this the way it is and the wax on the surface will shine that up real nice. I don't really like that, I like more of a matte finish. And so what I'm gonna do is just take just enough to kind of get the surface wet again, very unceremoniously. And then buff that while it's a little bit wet still. And I'll try to show you here. This side has not been re-wetted down. And so maybe you can see, maybe not. This side has already taken much more of a shine than this side is. Can you see that? I don't know. But I don't like it, so. And now you're gonna get a little bit of the excess stuff off when you do this with the Obanov. And so I buff it until it comes away clean. And so now that is my process for dyeing using the water-based dyes. And one thing to remember is when you use the Obanov after the fact, it is going to darken it just a shade darker in the long run. So whatever color you're trying to achieve using this method, you want to go just a shade lighter before you put the Obanov on, because it will darken it just a little. Okay, if you're still with me thus far and have not deemed me a damnable heretic, there's literally people outside my door building a pyre to burn me at the stake right now. I'm just joking. You don't have to agree with everything I say. We don't have to be friends, it's okay. But if you think this is too out of the way, you better buckle up, buddy. Because it only gets worse from here with my leathercraft, I promise. So anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit of theory about why I do it this way and why I don't use the oil-based dyes, because I hate them. I hate the oil-based dyes, that is a fact. And the reason for that is, early in my career, I started using the oil-based dyes and they appeared to nuke my leather every time. I mean, dry, crunchy, terrible, nuked leather. And the dark cocoa brown Fiebing's oil dye that I was using produced like a milky cocoa brown, like somebody that drinks a bunch of milk in their cocoa. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't the finish I wanted. It destroyed my leather, in my opinion. I wasn't going for that. So I set on a quest to do it differently to attain results that I did like and could be happy with, and spent a lot of time talking to Tandy managers who told me that's not going to work, 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 over and over and over again. With all of my suggestions and my thoughts and my theories that I was talking through and trying to ask their opinions on. And then I saw the work that they had hanging, that they had finished themselves, hanging up around the shop, as often happens in the Tandy place. They do leather work themselves and display it around. And so I touched that and felt it and looked at it and was like, that ain't gonna work. And so I went ahead and experimented over and 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 over again, and came to my own conclusions and developed my own method that I am happy with and I do like and does work, and I like it and I'm gonna keep doing it. Now the fibings that I'm using now is a little bit different than what I was using. I was using EcoFlow for the longest time, but just like all things Tandy leather, the stuff that I liked became wholly unavailable where I was at, and then I would ask the managers, hey, where'd this dye go? And they're like, oh, that doesn't exist. And I'd be like, oh yeah, it does. And they'd be like, no, look at the color palette, it's not there, it doesn't exist. And I'd get home and send them a picture of my bottle, and then they would be like, oh, we can special order that. And I'm like, no, okay. So fibings, this stuff has got much better reviews than the EcoFlow stuff, which I'm thoroughly done with forever. And so I'm going to use the fibing stuff now. If it can be ordered off Amazon, trust me, I'm going to put a link in the description of this video where you can click on that link and order the dye if you want to try it or use it yourself, and then I'll get some money for it. And that's a win-win, in my opinion. Probably get free shipping on it from Amazon if you have a Prime account. Otherwise, you know, buy it from wherever you buy it from, whatever. But why do I use that stuff and use the methods that I use? And that's because, in my opinion, it provides a superior product. And that could just be a matter of opinion and my preference. If you don't believe that, or you do something different, then whatever. You do what you like to do. I'm going to tell you about it though. So, this is a tale of two sheaths. I made this one. I did not make this one. I made this one for Malcolm's 2-year Hidden Woodsman anniversary knife from LT Wright, which I got a free one of and love. This is the prototype, so it doesn't have his logo on it, and it's a bit stained up because I use it. And it's developing a natural patina over the course of time, and plus it's kind of dirty and I haven't wiped it off, so that's what that is. Anyway, love this knife, very good. Don't worry, that's just a camera angle. I'm not anywhere near my face with it. So anyway, we're gonna talk about the sheath instead though. So I'll take this fire steel that I actually kept because it kind of turned out a little ugly, and you can't take the handle off once it did, so I kind of like it. It's got character, so I'll keep it. Anyway, this sheath, I didn't dye this part, and I didn't dye this part because the first one was a little bit experimental, a two-tone to kind of match the two-tone of the handle there. It's got some liners under the scales. I like the idea. I think it looks great. Malcolm didn't love it, so we went with an all same color sheath. He was afraid people would think it was unfinished, and whatever. It was his deal, so I like it, so I got to keep this one. And a couple of things you're gonna notice. The wet form. I've had this knife for, I don't know what knife he just did, 5th year anniversary, 2 or 3 years. Hey, do you remember when I did Malcolm sheaths?
Fall of 2016.
All right, how long ago was that then? 3 years ago? 2.5 years ago?
2.5 years ago.
All right, so this sheath is 2.5 years old. I've carried it a bunch. And when I say carry it, I don't mean around town on my belt or on my weekend trips to my favorite bushcraft or camping site. I mean out in the freaking bush here in Alaska every day. Not every day for 2.5 years, but I carried it a bunch. I haven't been carrying it lately because I've got this new thing where I don't like stuff on my belt, but it's been carried a bunch. It's got scratches and scrapes on it. You see some there. You can see there where these are scrapes and scratches where stuff has indented the sheath without removing the color. This was done with EcoFlow dye. This little spot is where when I was wet forming I had a little cracker crumb on the table, and it made a really cool looking thing there. So graham crackers, if you want this kind of pitted looking stuff on your leather, just get it wet and crunch it over some graham crackers and that'll do. So, a few things. The wet form has held up well. It's still got a good retention. This knife is not coming out of this sheath unless you want it to. Held its form. Another thing, it is still very weatherproof. I can still feel it's a little oily, not like Latigo or an oily. It's not coming off on my fingers, but I can just feel that it's got some. It's not wet, but it's not like crunchy dry either. Another thing, without trying to slide my fingers. That's my hand. That's my hand making that noise. It's not squeaky. It is not squeaky, and it's treated inside and out. And if somebody thinks that's a bad idea, like the Tandy managers told me, you don't want to overly treat your stuff, and you don't. You don't want to saturate this in oil or like soak it or do anything dumb, because then it's not good. But something like this is a drum-dyed harness leather from Wicket and Craig, or somewhere. Maybe it's not Wicket and Craig, but it's oil-dyed, drum-dyed, hot-stuffed harness leather, and they use heat and pressure to push the stuff into the thing and tumble it around in the hide so you get max penetration for the dye. And that's something I've heard a lot about. This is more of a leather paint. EcoFlow or water-based dyes, and they even call it watercolors. They don't even call it dye on the fibings. It's a paint, and it just goes on the surface and it doesn't penetrate. Maybe if you do it wrong, that's true. If you oil it first, that's not true. I don't know why that is, but that's just what I have found. So, what happens here is, even with the process of hot stuffing and drum dyeing, you see how deep that oil dye penetrated? This is not a cheap leather. Do you see how deep that didn't really penetrate? You can feel the oil on this. It's not dry, it's kind of wet. It's not quite a Latigo, but it didn't penetrate that much either, because it's only going to go so far into the veg stand. That's just a fact. So, tale of two sheaths. Here's the second sheath. This is a super fancy, very expensive knife from the famous J. Nielsen. There's his little signature under my forced patina that I did with berries that I like a lot. You can see this is the temper line. This is done when he was a junior smith, so it's not as cool as when he was a master smith, but it's still a freaking super cool knife. I don't use this at all because I'm scared. I'm scared too. And I need to change this to a darker thing just to give it a good... This is a fighting knife, and I don't do a lot of knife fighting, so that's why I don't use it. But we're talking about the sheath here. I didn't make this sheath. This sheath was made by somebody else for J. Nielsen a long time ago. This knife has never been carried anywhere, ever. It's got edge coat on it. It's dyed with oil dye. It is sealed with some kind of acrylic or whatever kind of sealer that you would seal on it. That's not my hand making that noise. Do you hear that? Just to be fair, we'll take it out of this thing. which is pretty cool, little frog thing. Okay, I can't bend it to make it squeak. Point being, it's dry. Hear that? Squeaky leather. It's crunchy. Hear it? And now it could just be argued this needs to be oiled and all good to go, except that it's got a plastic finish over the top of it. And so how much penetration are you really going to get with that? Not to mention it's been carried nowhere. Now it has been stored and rubbed up against stuff, and sure, that'll mess your stuff up, but as far as penetration, and I don't think so. This one was done right. This one was done wrong. And you can just feel the difference between this leather and this leather. This leather feels dead. It's just dry and crunchy. This leather feels very supple and good. And I don't mean supple like this, the knife is gonna poke through it, but it just feels bright to me. Feels much more like a hot stuffed leather. Now this is the strap that's gonna go with that bag I showed in the beginning of the video. And it's been dyed and treated, and it's not wet. You're not gonna get anything on you from it. But it's just supple and it feels good, and it's stuffed with freaking waxes and oils, even though it wasn't done in a drum. It was done with pressure from my hands and heat from my hands. And it's just superior. Not because I did it, but if I was gonna buy leather, and that's the way I make my stuff. If I was gonna search something out and buy it, this is much higher on the list of my choice than something that's crunchy and squeaky and feels too light and too dry. And so anyway, that's what I do. And that's why I do it. And if you disagree, that's okay. You can disagree, that's fine with me. I'm not the kind of person that has to be agreed with everything I say. That would be boring. And I've got a lot of this. I got a lot of this kind of stuff, like holsters and stuff, that's just dry and crunchy and doesn't feel like it's got a lot of heart and soul and I mean, it'll probably last for a while. I'm not trying to say it won't or that it's garbage. You know, this is a high quality thing here. But it's not what I wanted. It's not what I set out to do. It's not what I like. It's not what I'm gonna do with my leather. I want my stuff to be different. Feels different. It's gonna last longer. It's got much more. The sound of the squeaky leather. You got leather that's just squeaky and loud. If your leather is loud, that's the sound of the fibers abrading against themselves from the inside. From the inside out. And in my opinion, I don't want my leather to abrade from the inside out. I want it to be decently lubricated inside and out so that there's no room for water to go in there and dirt to get in there. All right, so that's it. A little more buffing on this, and then I'm going to do a final burnish on the edges and the underside because I ain't quite done yet, but that's not what this video is about. It's about using the dye. So let me know in the comments all of your worst criticisms and any questions you might have. And you're probably not going to change my mind about anything at this point but maybe there's something I don't know that you do. And maybe there's stuff I've heard 1,000 times that I don't agree with that you can tell me again. But it's okay. I'm a big boy, I can handle it. Let me know. If you got any questions, you got anything to tell me, do it in the comments. like, subscribe, share, all the things that's going to make me more successful. Be good on my end. I got more videos coming. I did a bunch of videos that I have saved on my hard drive, my external hard drive, but I don't have a laptop yet, again, still. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with those, but currently I'm doing everything on my phone until I get another laptop, and I don't know what else to do there. So that's what it's gonna be. So that's what it's gonna be. So that's it for me. Have a good day.